So let's unravel the problem with gut health, right? What has your research revealed about our gut-brain connection?
Initially, we thought the brain controlled everything. And then when hormones were coming from the gut, we thought, oh, there's neurons down in the gut, because we didn't know really about the microbiome until the microbiome project was finished in 2017, not long ago. For most people, it takes 9 months to a year to, for instance, see a leaky gut and get our microbiome back.
You need all the parts together simultaneously to make protein. And people cannot store protein. You got to make protein every day, just like how you have to make mitochondria every day.
We are over-proteinized in the United States.
Over-proteinized. I had never heard that word. Oh, thank you for that.
And what really gets everybody just goes bonkers, people ought to realize that 82% of the protein that we eat is converted into sugar.
Wow. Yeah.
Right.
Hi guys, welcome back to another edition of Beyond Biohacking Brothers, where we explore everything about longevity, optimization, biohacking, and beyond. As always, I'm here today joined by my brother Carlos, and today we have the honor and privilege of welcoming Dr. Stephen Gundry. Dr. Gundry is a renowned cardiologist, cardiothoracic surgeon, and longevity expert who has dedicated his career to optimizing health and preventive chronic diseases. His best-selling books, including The Plant Paradox, The Longevity Paradox, and now his new book, The Gut-Brain Paradox, challenges conventional medicine, offering a radical perspective on how food and lifestyle drive longevity and cognitive health.
Well, I'm happy to be here. So, let's dive in.
Yes. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start by what inspired you to write your new book, The Gut-Brain Paradox.
Well, this is, I think, number 9 in the Paradox series, and I don't write just to write a book. Usually something, either I've noticed, I've been doing what I do now for 25 years, a little bit more than that. And my last book, Gut Check, really started to try to get everybody used to the microbiome, all those little critters that live in us and on us. And with each passing year, almost each passing day, thanks to the Human Microbiome Project, we know who's living in there. We can quantify who's living in there. We know how many of each guy should be there. We know the balance. And what's really been startling is that the language that our microbiome, that let's just talk about our bacteria, use to talk to our brain, yes, and use to manipulate our behavior. Once we translated the language, the whole spectrum opens up to realize that little one-cell organisms are sentient beings, and they've been around for 3 billion years, and we've been around 100,000 years, and maybe, just maybe, that cooperation between them and us is how we've made it so far. And this book is about, hey guys, you wouldn't believe the language we've discovered, that they talk to us, that they manipulate us. And number one, be very afraid, but also be very empowered that now that we know the language, we can get what we need from them rather than them just directing us.
Right. Work in unison with it.
That is awesome. That
Right.
is awesome and profound, right? And I think
Yes.
that Miguel has a question crafted around that, that there are these living organisms that can influence our behavior very, very much.
Yes.
And yes, being scared of it because they're real, but also being empowered that now we have the, the power of technology and we can leverage that in our favor to know how to work with them.
Yes. So let's unravel the problem with gut health, right? What has your research revealed about our gut brain connection that challenges conventional medicine and keeps us misinformed?
Well, let's just use one example from the book. We know that depression and anxiety is at epidemic levels. Now, we can point our fingers at lots of things like COVID and social media.
Antibiotics,
Yeah.
overuse of them.
Yeah. And I think the antibiotics are a great place to start. But we know that there's a huge number of people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs. And a lot of these are what are called SSRIs or serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Yes.
Serotonin, most people know, is the, happy hormone, make you feel good hormone. And we didn't know up until a few years ago that it's actually our gut microbiome
Mm.
that
Right.
produces most of our serotonin, number one.
Right.
And we know now that glyphosate, Roundup, is particularly good at killing off the organisms in our gut that make serotonin. Oops. Number three, if serotonin reuptake inhibitors actually work the way they work by just stopping breakdown of serotonin in your brain, then if you swallowed one of these pills of Prozac, then tomorrow you'd wake up happy and your depression would be gone because you'd have plenty of serotonin up there. Anyone
Right.
who uses these drugs or is known to have been on these drugs, no, it doesn't happen tomorrow. It can take a month or so
Mm.
for this effect to kick in. Well, now we know that it kicks in so late because these drugs work not by changing serotonin in the brain, but actually changing the microbiome to a more favorable microbiome.
Mm.
So it's like, well, we were wrong about that. So it takes that long to do it. We know that depressed individuals, if we can take mice and have them eat the poop from depressed individuals, and believe me, mice and rats love to eat poop. And these
Interesting.
mice, yeah, they love to.
Interesting. Did not know that fun
I
fact.
didn't know that
Fun fact,
part.
they just think it's great stuff. Um, they they will become depressed because of the microbiome that they ate from the depressed individual. And similarly, you could take a depressed mouse, and believe me or not, we can test depression in rats and mice. There are mazes that they have to do. And you can give them poop from happy people, and sure enough, they'll become happy.
Which,
Yes.
which is funny because there's been some similar reports on people that have done fecal transfusions, right? Like
Ego transplants.
fecal transplants where they want to change their gut microbiome, and they've had some similar effects to that. So that's
Yeah,
super.
no, for like obesogen. So if you grab a healthy mice that are healthy and slim and you inject them to obese mice, they become slim and vice versa,
That's
right?
exactly right. That's
Almost
exactly
like parabiosis, like putting younger blood into somebody, but using bacteria.
Yeah.
yeah.
And which, by the way, it's funny that you say that about the serotonin because I understand that the five most important neurotransmitters like glutamate, gamma aminobutyric acid, serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine are the five drivers that basically stimulate the rest of the neurotransmitters. So is it 90% of our neurotransmitter of serotonin is our gut, or is it these five? Because, they're related to sleep, focus, muscle contraction, to everything, basically.
Right. They're really all coming in one way or another from the gut. And that's been the evolution. For instance, initially we thought the brain controlled everything.
Mm.
And then when hormones were coming from the gut, we thought, oh, there's neurons down in the gut that are making these substances, because we didn't know really about the microbiome until the microbiome project was finished in 2017, not long ago. So we said, oh, it's the neurons down in the gut that are making these hormones, and those are going into the bloodstream and they're affecting the brain. Well, hold on. It turns out that the missing piece was the gut microbiome. And
Right.
all of a sudden,
Mm.
so you heard about the gut brain axis and that the gut is the second brain. Well,
Yeah.
now it's actually, I submit, it's actually the first brain. And these microbiome are controlling and sending messages to our brain to drive the brain.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah,
let me,
that's how I'm assuming depression, anxiety is also affected, especially with vaccines and antibiotics. We've wiped out our gut, and that's why there's also, aside from prescribing these drugs and messing up our neurofeedback, it's also based on our gut.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, I was in medical school when broad spectrum antibiotics came out, back in the dark ages.
But thank you for being the light in the
Thank you for
dark
being
ages.
there. Thank you for being there.
Yeah.
And this was in the mid 1970s, and they were miraculous because, before we would have to culture a bacteria that we thought was causing an infection. A lot of times we couldn't grow them. And then we'd have to test antibiotics against them to see which would work. And this was a long process. And in the process, people were dying.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, now we've got a shotgun that
Right.
we don't even care who it is. We don't have to test for it. We just, take an AK-47 on automatic and blow apart.
Right.
And
Great
it was
analogy.
miraculous.
Yeah.
But we didn't know, because we didn't know these guys were down there, that not only we were killing the bad guys, but we were mowing down innocent civilians, our microbiome.
Right.
And so what was miraculous, it turns out, was just so incredibly overused. And we killed off really the main part of us that did all the thinking and planning for us.
Right.
Hmm.
Wonderful. So what
Yeah,
would you
I,
say are
I
the
always like to tell the personal story, just it's related. I had an oral infection, it almost killed me, and I had to get surgery. I had 3 consecutive surgeries back to back. When they began one surgery after the other, I still had the stitches from the last surgery. That's how bad the infection had gone and almost went to my brain. So I was given, for 3 months, I was given every antibiotic that you can think of. And, I always like to tell people at that time, I had some pretty aggressive SIBO and a bunch of other things that were, in my gut, and we were trying to treat it. And as you know, treating the gut, and we'll get into that today, treating the gut can be complicated. And the only value that I got from the antibiotics, because we later found out that the infection that I had was resistant to every antibiotic that I took, right? So, but the value of it was so destructive to my gut. I mean, it wiped me out completely. I did start get the beginning of like depression. It was, dark thinking and, something that is outside of my character, to kind of put it that way. But it did wipe out my gut to such an extent that like you said, you described it perfectly. It took an AK-47, killed off everything. And then I had to go into an intense protocol to rebuild my gut. And then I was healed, right? But it just goes to kind of line out what the power of antibiotics can have on your gut, and the kind of mood balances that that they can influence, for sure.
Yeah. So what are the biggest dietary and lifestyle mistakes damaging our gut and brain health from your perspective?
Well, the our great great grandparents ate whole foods,
Yeah.
and they ate those whole foods whole.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, we no longer eat whole foods, and we certainly don't eat them whole.
Wow.
We've processed almost all of our foods primarily to make them capable of sitting in a bag on a shelf for a year without going bad. Uh, so we've removed almost all the fiber that our gut bacteria actually have to have, the good guys,
Right.
to
Commensal bacteria.
yeah. Uh, so we've taken all that away. And back in the good old days, I had the head of the FDA on my podcast, former head of the FDA, and he and I went to medical school again a long time ago. And back in those days, we thought the gut, you swallowed stuff, some enzymes got squirted in, you absorbed proteins and sugars and fats, and then whatever was left over, you pooped out the rear end after the magic happened. And that's kind of how we were taught. And we had no idea that there were 100 trillion bacteria down in our gut, primarily in our colon, or what they were even doing down there. So
Right.
when we used to eat things whole, yes, we would extract sugars and proteins and fats, but we couldn't digest complex carbohydrates well. We don't have the enzyme system. So a
When
lot
you're
of
saying complex, you're talking about fibrous vegetables
yeah,
in general. Okay.
yeah, starches,
All right.
resistant starches. We can't break these down well with our enzymes. So these guys, if you will, would trickle down to our gut microbiome, who loves this stuff. And it was always available to them. And then they took these complex carbohydrates primarily, and there can be some in animal protein. And they'd make all these incredible communication system, which we now call postbiotics, and
Mm,
everything was balanced. So as long as they were getting this stuff, believe it or not, they would send text messages up to our brain saying, "Hey, we got what we need to eat. We're good. You don't need to go find anything else. We're satisfied." Now we eat these things that are completely devoid of these soluble fibers. And the guys down in our gut hear us chewing, they hear us swallowing, they say, "Oh, good, meal's coming." Nothing arrives. And the stuff we do eat, mentioned SIBO, we know that certain bacteria are really good at getting to simple sugars and simple fats higher up in our intestines.
Mm-hmm.
They grab that before anything can drift down. So now nothing gets down to the guys who were waiting for it.
Right.
And so they're actually desperately sending text messages up to the brain saying, "Geez, I heard you chewing, I heard you swallowing, but there's nothing coming. Go find some more. You've been cheated, or we've been cheated."
all right.
And it's called the gut-centric theory of hunger, and it makes so much incredible sense. We
Yes.
now know that GLP-1, the Ozempic, is made by gut bacteria
Right.
to tell your brain that
Wow.
we're doing fine. Thanks very
Right.
much.
Right.
And it's no wonder that our great great grandparents were all skinny as rails because they had this feedback. Hey, we're good. You don't need to go find anything else. And now we have a feedback, but it's, "Oh my gosh, we're starving down here. You better go
Right.
find something to eat." And the stuff we find doesn't feed them.
Yeah.
In other words, I like to say we're eating empty calories that are designed to make us addicted because they're being engineered in a lab to cause a foodgasm. And I think the statistics is that 50% of Americans eat ultra processed food, meaning anything coming from a box would be considered ultra processed, which doesn't contain the amount of fiber. And correct me if I'm wrong, back in our ancestral times, we would eat about 200 to 300 grams of fiber. We're lucky if you're getting 20 grams of fiber today. And fiber is also a way to detox heavy metals in your blood.
Yeah. We just, number one, our hunter-gatherers, you're right, anywhere from 150, 200 grams of fiber, mostly soluble fiber. And they were eating, 250 different species of plants on a yearly basis. And all these plants were grown in 6 feet of loam soil. And I was talking to a podcaster in Australia about the Aborigines, and in that culture, of course, they're digging up tubers, and they're not washing the tubers 3 times with disinfectants. They're pulling the tuber out of the ground, brushing it off a little bit and eating it. And when I was growing up, we had victory gardens, and you'd pull a carrot out of the ground and you brush it on your pants and you'd eat it. And the dirt went in and the microbiome on the carrot went into you. And we talk about this in the book. We totally lost all of this in our modern.
Which brings me to, I just have this question because, we give presentations across the country, and a big part of our presentation is this. Like, where do you stand on like the nutrient deficiencies on our soil? Because we talked about ultra processed foods, we talked about things in a box. I think we all have a sense of how unnatural that is. But what I think is an even scarier thing is that even when you do try to eat wholesome foods and stuff like that, it becomes increasingly difficult for most people, especially living in a metropolitan city, because we all get our foods from supermarkets, right? And usually the typical fruit or vegetable travel 1,500 miles to get there, and then they're sprayed with pesticides and other stuff to keep them fresh. But let's talk about the soil for just 1 minute. And Miguel, I don't mean to kind of rabbit hole, but I think this is important for listeners to understand, is that our soil has been compromised. So the soil in which the vegetables and foods grow that feed us and the animals that we eat has been compromised, not to mention that they're growing on soil that has been also compromised by chemicals. So where do you stand on that in terms of like the depletion of our soil and how that plays into, the gut microbiome and this conversation that we're having?
Yeah, here's a shocker. I used to, when I lecture to physician groups, I used to show a slide from a U.S. Senate document that the document basically said our soil is so depleted that you could continue to eat continuously and never get the nutrients that you need from eating. And I go, when do you think this document was introduced in the Senate? Then people would go, oh, year 2000, or year 1990. It was actually in 1936.
Wow.
Already knew that through our, farming practices, almost 100 years ago now, 90 years ago, we already knew that our soil was completely depleted. And imagine what it's like now. And, I do some YouTube videos about, the magnesium content in our soil and the potassium content and the phosphorus content, all these micronutrients, and they're gone. And
like the periodic table of element, that's basically what was in the soil. Half of it is gone.
You're right? It's just gone. And never to come back.
Yeah. Which, and it's interesting because I wanted to talk about that. The reason why I pounced on this is because, you talked about the depletion, but we also talked about like the gut bacteria that actually induces GLP and makes us feel satisfied. And, you made a great
we'll get into that.
A great analogy about the text messages and being wrong and being, and not getting what you need. And that's super important because unfortunately, like I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, do you think that I like to take 30 supplements a day? I don't really like to do it, but I have to do it because no matter where I go, I'm going to eat depleted foods, my gut microbiome is going to keep me hungry. And what's interesting is, Miguel and I do a lot of fasting, and we even do high level extreme activities while fasted. And the funny thing is how incredible it is when you give your cells what they need strategically. They don't ask you for more stuff because, yes, like you said, it's like, hey, I got everything I need. Let's get to work.
Yeah. And to give people context, correct us if we're wrong, we have, depending on the literature, 20 to 25,000 genes, but in our microbiome, we have like 2 million genes. So we're coding for so much more information. And as you were saying, in the soil, I think it's like per 1 gram of soil and dirt, there was like 10 million microorganisms, which is basically wiped out. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, and again, this book also goes into the fact that the soil organisms actually, when we used to eat them, teach our immune system and teach that some of these what we call LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, actually aren't the bad guys that everybody thinks they are. And I spend a chapter explaining why in the good old days we became tolerant of LPSs by eating LPSs, eating bacteria, and teaching our immune system, oh, we know those guys. We've been seeing them every day. They're not the bad guys that everybody makes it out to be. So, and that's a huge part that's been missing in educating our immune system about who's bad and who's good.
Right.
So there's some truth to that old adage, let your kids go outside and eat dirt.
Oh yeah, and we know, for instance, we know that people who have dogs have a much more diverse microbiome than people who don't have dogs, or outdoor cats. Indoor cat people don't have a good microbiome.
That's
Right.
interesting.
So dogs bring this stuff in, and I actually write prescriptions for people to get a dog. In fact,
Look at that.
Wow.
Wow. It's a nice
and
fun fact.
several people have brought that prescription framed, and they said, this is the only prescription that a doctor has ever given me that changed my life.
I love that. We tend to, on our prescriptions, put you need to exercise and you need to develop some form of meditation, things that are outside of just taking a pill or an injection or a conventional strategy of medicine. Now, let's shift into something that's controversial and you're very known for, which is almost a paradox because, we need micronutrients. So most of us do what? We eat lots of vegetables, spinach, kale, and all these vegetables, but then we have the problem of lectins. So what are lectins? What are they harmful? Why are they harmful? And how do they contribute to disease in our bodies?
Yeah.
Yeah, so plants were here first. They had it really good before animals arrived because nobody wanted to eat them. Insects were the first plant predator. And when insects arrived, plants had a problem. They couldn't run, they couldn't hide, they couldn't fight, but they're chemists of incredible ability. They can turn sunlight into matter, and we haven't figured out how to do that yet. Anyhow, so they use chemical and biologic warfare against their predators to make them think twice about eating them. And part of that are proteins that are called lectins. There are numerous other things like oxalates and phytates, all of which are designed to literally make the predator not thrive. And a smart predator goes, every time I eat this plant or this plant baby, its seeds, I'm not thriving, I'm not reproducing well, I'm not going to eat that. We animals developed a defense against these defensive plant weapons. And back in the old days, as I wrote about in the Plant Paradox, we had an incredibly good defense system against these plant compounds. For instance, we know there are oxalate eating bacteria. they're pretty much wiped out of us right now. And people who think they are sensitive to oxalates just don't have those bacteria that eat them.
Mm.
There are gluten-eating bacteria, and gluten is a classic lectin. They're gone in most people. So I use the example of a football team. So you've got the offensive line whose job is to protect the quarterback from the on-rushing linebackers.
Right.
And if they're really good, the quarterback back there picking his teeth has got all the time in the world to check off which receiver he wants to and get the ball to the guy. Well, with all of our antibiotics and all of our processed foods, et cetera, and glyphosate, our offensive line is decimated.
Mm.
We've been through the third stringers, and now we're getting the water boy and pulling people out of the stands to try and protect the quarterback. And now all these linebackers, and let's call them lectins, they're going right through this line, and the quarterback's getting sacked. He's got a flak jacket. He's throwing the ball away fast. And that's what's happened to us. And when I wrote the plant paradox, and I called them the seven deadly disruptors, people didn't hear that. Guess what, guys? We've been set up because that line of defense is gone.
Right.
If you look at cultures
Interesting.
that do well eating whole plants, their line of defense is intact because they don't live around us.
Yeah.
And can we rebuild that line? Absolutely. That was the point of the plant paradox. We can rebuild our offensive line. It takes a while. For most people, it takes 9 months to a year to, for instance, seal leaky gut and get our microbiome back. And we can measure these things. So the point is, and this book even goes one step further. Most cultures have always figured out a way to detoxify these plant compounds, primarily with fermentation. Um, an example, everybody, oh, quinoa is so healthy, the Incas ate it. Guess what? The Incas wouldn't come near quinoa unless they fermented it. They let it rot,
Yeah.
to, and then they cooked it. And it's
Right.
not on package directions. So it's like, oh, it's a healthy grain. The Incas thrived on it. Well, no, they didn't. They fermented it. If we think about even wheat, believe it or not, wheat, whole wheat was considered so dangerous that there's texts back in the Roman Empire times about which is the whitest wheat. And it was apparently Egyptian wheat because it had the least harmful lectins in it. And interestingly enough, you never ate wheat that wasn't fermented.
Yeah.
The fermentation process was breaking this down.
Right.
Uh, Bacteria love to eat lectins. Unfortunately, our gut bacteria are gone. So, oh well.
Interesting. So, based on everything you're saying, and we have a tier system, and gut therapy is tier 4, just based on what we do. We were initially a hormone clinic, but now we're a lifestyle clinic based on performance, and people come to us because of that. We're known for that in peptides, but we're getting to the point that we realize that even for traditional medicine, one of the first lines of defense that every doctor should start with, instead of a CBC, CMP, and lipids, is actually testing the gut. And in school, people should be educated on how to treat the gut, because I want to, before we move into protein, which is a very important question, how gut bacteria influence our cravings for certain foods, and how now we're using GLP-1s like it's Skittles because people can't control their cravings, but it's really due because now they don't have Akkermansia, which produce naturally GLP. So we're basically using a Band-Aid, although it's basically one of the most revolutionary drugs ever invented. Granted, we're still Band-Aiding the problem, not treating the root cause of it, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. For instance, there was a beautiful study that I've cited in several of my books in China where they put volunteers on a 14-day water fast. All they got was water. half of the volunteers were given 100 calories of non-absorbable fiber. And that means they couldn't absorb calories from that fiber, but the fiber fed gut bacteria. The group that got 100 calories of fiber had absolutely no hunger for 14 days of a water fast.
Wow.
The other folks, as people who've done water fasts know, you're pretty hungry for a while. Now, eventually it goes away, but what the point was, the bacteria said, hey, we got what we need. You don't have to go looking for anything. We're actually driving your hunger. The other group, the bacteria, are going, geez, we're starving to death. Where is it? And that's what's happened to us. We literally are starving our bacteria to death, and they're crying out, and we're not producing like GLP-1. Yeah, we're fine. No problem.
And to kind of just echo from what Miguel said, I mean, look, the reason why we say that these are revolutionary medications is because kind of like how penicillin and was saving us from infections back in the time when we had this problem. Americans are dying from metabolic disease, right? The statistics are just staggering, absurd. They're angering, right? And so because we're dying of metabolic disease, these GLPs have been amazing to curb some of the behavioral patterns that people have been addicted to, right? Through, ultra processed foods and, just poor knowledge of how your body works. But what we're trying to tell the viewer now is that although those, if it's appropriate for you and it's kind of like an interventive sort of therapy for you in the beginning, the long-term strategy should be treating the gut bacteria that produce GLP-1 so you could do this naturally, not to mention the fact of building these defenders that protect you from a bunch of other stuff, not just hunger, that can be a deleterious event in your life, specifically speaking, your brain power, right?
No, even to add to that, I would say that, it's turning off what they call, quote unquote, the food noise, but they're still picking the wrong food choices. So they're not feeding the bacteria. So again, it's a temporary fix. And once you stop, they're like, I'm going to die, right? People are literally, it's almost like crack cocaine for them because they're still making those wrong choices, making the situation worse by patching up the problem.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit, but for anybody listening at this point, let's just recap. I mean, your book, the Gut Brain Paradox, covers everything that we just discussed. And for anybody listening, go read this book. Listen, I mean, do you have it? You have it on audio format, right, Doc?
Yep.
Listen,
and in different languages?
Yeah.
Yeah, in general, most of my books come out in at least Spanish, French. The Plant Paradox has been translated into 36 foreign languages, including Latvian.
Wow.
Well, listen, the point that I was trying to make is, as Miguel said, gut integrity is one of the hallmarks of aging, and everybody on the planet, as long as you're living in this solar system, you're going to have some kind of gut issues that you need to fix, or at the very least, I mean, your analogy with the football players is great. Know how to get the right players in the game so that your quarterback can be protected.
Yeah. In other words, they should be testing for every year, not just once in your life. Every year or so, you should be testing for your gut and making sure you're redirecting course.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, I want to go back to something. Yeah. This is not taught in medical schools even today. Mark Hyman is a friend of mine, and he has a daughter who's a third-year medical student at a prestigious university that I won't mention. There's 4-year medical schools, 4 years. At the end now of her third year, she has yet to have a course on the microbiome.
Wow. Look at that.
Yeah. I mean, Casey Means expounds on this in her book, Good Energy, which I loved. The how little medical doctors are trained about nutrition, which is I mean, it's one of the stools of wellness, right? Like it
Yeah.
starts from here, and the fact that they don't study the microbiome in medical school, it just tells us a little bit. I have a question for you on that. It tells us about how broken our healthcare system is to treat chronic disease, right? I
Well,
mean,
in other words, they don't have medications they can sell the patient, and that's why the gut. Forget the gut because there's no business in the gut.
oh, and also, the poor training there, it just opens up the door for just bad incentives. And we're really good at treating acute disease, right? Like, that's one of the advantages of the United States. I mean, you have a heart attack, you have a stroke, you have a gunshot wound, go to the hospital, they will save your life. We have amazing people there. But when it comes to the treatment of long-term chronic disease, it's pathetic what we're seeing. And so that's why we kind of wanted to talk to you and kind of bring this into people's sort of radar, because the more and more that we talk about it, the more awareness that there is around this, the more that we will demand change and make better choices, right? Buy from companies that are doing the right things, that are not putting microphthalates and parabens and stuff like that into your food and your deodorants and soaps. I mean, this stuff is this lifestyle is tough. It can become very overwhelming, but you would be amazed at the benefits that you start to feel when you start to get all this stuff right.
Yeah.
So with that said, Doc, I wanted to ask you because, look, and we have a very strong position on this, so I want to know what yours is. There's a decade-long debate about, protein intake, how much you should take, right? All that stuff. So a lot of people, we live in a culture that has been kind of indoctrinated to say that more is always better and essential for muscle and longevity. And, you caution against that. So can you please tell us what your research has found and what is the role of protein and how much we should be consuming, and should we be obsessed with this stuff, how our culture is?
So I think there's probably three of us in academia who are considered the villains of high protein use. One is my friend Walter Longo, who's the
Mm,
head of longevity at US.
yes.
Yeah.
The other
Well
one
known
is
for the Prolon diet.
exactly, and the other one is Christopher Gardner, who's a professor and head of nutrition at Stanford. And basically we are over proteinized in the United States.
Over proteinized. I had never heard that word. Oh, thank you for that. Over proteinized. I'm gonna write that down.
And by the way, we're with you on this.
Keep
So,
going. Sorry.
so the way the USDA establishes requirements for how much protein you need, for instance,
Mhm.
the recommended daily allowance is actually was calculated many years ago. And the average person to meet their protein requirements needs about 50 grams of protein a day.
Yeah.
But most people are not average. So half of the people will need, we'll just choose 50 from, will need less than 50 grams of protein per day. But the other half will need more than 50 grams of protein. So the USDA said, well, if we kind of double the amount that the average person would need, we'll cover the needs of 95% of Americans.
Hmm.
So they took the initial data and then doubled it. And so let's take it up to 100 grams of protein. So people say, oh, well, that's what the minimum requirement is. No, that's not what that means. That means that 100 grams of protein will cover 95% of any human being's needs. 50 will probably do it. And for half of you, you don't even need 50.
Wow.
So the average American consumes double the recommended daily allowance. So that's actually 4 times the amount that a normal human being needs.
Incredible.
So what? And I love Christopher Gardner when he talks about this. We got to remember, we have a very limited storage system for protein.
Mhm.
It's bones and our muscles, and that's about it. We have an unlimited storage system for sugar. It's called fat. Unlimited.
Unlimited, yeah.
So what do we do with all that extra protein we're consuming? We convert it into sugar, gluconeogenesis.
Thank you.
Because we can burn it as a fuel, or we can store it as fat.
Yes.
And and
you know 90% of Americans don't know this, right?
no, of course.
Yeah.
And what really gets everybody just goes bonkers. People ought to realize that 82% of the protein that we eat is converted into sugar.
Wow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Because we're not, our body isn't dumb.
Yeah.
Now, there's no question that if you're actively exercising and you're making your muscles hungry and you're damaging your muscles by exercise, you need more immediately after that exercise and you'll use it. But for the average American couch potato, this idea that we need protein, and let me go back to one other thing that we forget. Again, our great-great-grandparents ate whole food, and they ate it whole.
Oh.
There's no such thing as a protein powder, folks.
Yeah.
And let's remember that if these wonderful protein things were really impressive about building muscle, then all of us in the 50s and 60s growing up should have been, Arnold Schwarzenegger, because every day, 2 or 3 times a day, we were having Jell-O. And Jell-O is collagen. And so we were having Jell-O for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We were having beef consomme, bone broth, for lunch every day. And nobody was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, that was steroids and many other things that go into that. But
let me give you the other side of the spectrum, and I got a quick question for you. So, Dr. Minkoff is a friend, and we learned from him the power of amino acids. Because I always like to tell people, it's like, hey, let me just tell you something. You don't need protein. What you need is to manufacture hundreds of thousands of proteins a day. That's what you need. So the question is really, what do I need to give my body so that it can make the proteins that I need on a daily basis, right? And like, as you said, eating a whole bunch of protein is probably not the most effective way of, making protein. So we started to incorporate essential amino acids about 6 years ago into
not branch chain amino acids, right. Essential amino acids.
Essential amino acids into our practice and personally.
Be careful about branch chain amino acids.
Yeah, yes. No, they're garbage.
Yes. But the cool thing about this is that, as you could tell, we're very muscular, super fit. We focus on performance and longevity. And the amount of, first of all, we stopped counting grams of protein 6 years ago. Like, if you're doing that, you don't get the point. But the fact of the matter is that we're probably having, in terms of whole foods, this recommendation, maybe 50 grams of protein, or maybe a little more, but because, obviously we're athletes, but we're making it up with the amino acids. And what a powerful thing it has been for people's health when you've gotten them away from this overconsumption of protein, which, by the way, like, whey protein will destroy your gut, right? And these protein powders, or, all this stuff that we're eating, and the sugar and blah, 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 and all this stuff.
Antibiotics in our food.
Right. And then just put them on a regimen where you're maintaining the minimum required amount of amino acids. It is like a Trojan horse. It has been an amazing thing to watch. So just to kind of confirm, because I wanted this confirmation for myself that we're over consuming protein, but you don't need all the protein to be fit. It's just about giving your body the things that make the protein muscles.
But then again, you have most people consuming branch chain amino acids, and how we like to explain it, the concept of irreducible complexity, right? If I give you a gun without a trigger, can you shoot your target? Or a boat without a propeller, can you go fishing? Or a piano without keys, can you play me a song? You can't. You need all the parts together simultaneously to make protein. And people cannot store protein. You got to make protein every day, just like how you have to make mitochondria every day, right? Which is something most people don't know.
So thank you for that confirmation. Again, everybody listening, this is why we're so big on telling you Do not overconsume protein. It turns into sugar. It turns into fat. I mean, and thank you for the Jello thing. That was actually
Yeah,
good.
you have great analogy, storytelling,
Yeah,
ways of explaining this. I love it.
he's been around for a while.
That's right.
All right, so just in line, I just want to kind of follow it, kind of give you a compound question, follow that up because look, I always tell people because you can get lost, right? Like nutrition can be difficult, and especially when we start talking about modern day living and the obstacles that our ancestors didn't have, which is ultra processed foods, chemicals, right? Devoided soils, right? That it started in the 1930s. So this, from our perspective, is brand new to our evolution, from an evolutionary biology perspective, I should say. So from a kind of simplistic, practical view of navigating this modern day living, because Miguel and I actually in our presentation were huge on teaching people how to get back to ancestral living, not living in a cave, but leveraging technology, leveraging, obviously experience and knowledge
The
to be able to
biological impacts that or biological things that we did as our ancestors.
Right. So from that perspective, when it comes to I've heard you say you're into lectin-free keto, which I like that term. So with keto and carnivore diets, right, skyrocketing in popularity, what are the key insights that you have uncovered about their benefits and risks? And from a practical standpoint, which approach do you believe is more sustainable and effective for longevity and long-term health?
So, I've even one of my previous books was Unlocking the Keto Code. Most people do keto completely wrong, in my humble opinion. I
Yes.
I do I do have some patients who kind of independently have tried the carnivore diet, and some people accuse me of being the father of the carnivore diet because if you take what I say about plant
Plants.
defense chemicals that uh, maybe you should never eat a plant and or a plant compound, and so the obvious thing to do is become a carnivore.
Yeah.
And yes, I do have some people with incredible leaky guts who are completely intolerant to plant compounds.
Right.
And we will put them on my version of the carnivore diet, which is in this book. And I call it the chicken and the sea diet.
Hmm.
And why? It's probably not within time periods to explain it, but uh, we have a sugar molecule called Nu5AC. A is capitalized that lines our gut, that lines our blood vessels, that lines our blood-brain barrier, that lines our joint surfaces. And we manufacture this sugar molecule. Beef, lamb, pork, and milk have a different molecule called Nu5AGC, sorry, capital G.
Okay.
Those molecules differ by one molecule of oxygen. Otherwise, they're identical.
Right.
So we hate Nu5GC. If you feed a human being Nu5GC, and it's been done, they make antibodies to Nu5GC.
Wow.
We hate it.
And you said that's in pork. What else?
Pork, lamb, beef, and milk products.
Oh no.
Oh, yes. Now, here's what's really interesting.
Uh,
Fish, shellfish, and poultry have Nu5AC, our molecule.
hmm.
Here, and one last thing. So when we eat, so what? There are lots and lots and lots and lots of papers, epidemiologic papers, showing a strong association between meat eating, dairy, and heart disease, cancer, arthritis, and dementia. Now, association does not mean causation.
Right.
But as I wrote about in the last book, we now know the causation. What's happened is because these two molecules are so similar, we can substitute Nu5GC into the lining of our gut, into the lining of our blood vessels, into the lining of our joints, into the lining of our blood-brain barrier, and kind of kick out Nu5AC. And there's really cool papers showing the more Nu5GC you eat, the more it's incorporated into these tissues. And we attack it. And we attack it aggressively. There's incredible, strong evidence that Nu5GC causes neuroinflammation. And you go, son of a gun. Now, I started to see this in my patients. Now, I still see patients 6 days a week. I see them on Saturdays and Sundays. So
That's
I'm not talking out of the side of my head. I see what happens when people do this. I see it in their blood work.
awesome.
And yes, they feel really good. Their gut gets a whole lot better. They're going, oh, I don't have these issues anymore. But in their blood work, I see all these inflammatory markers go up, even though they're feeling good. And I go, whoa, wait a minute. And so I'll say, hey guys, humor me. I want you to switch over to poultry and shellfish and fish and humor me. And if you gotta have beef, lamb, pork, you can have fermented beef. Believe it or not, traditional sausages are fermented. That's how they're preserved.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, prosciutto is fermented. It has living bacterial cultures in it.
Yeah.
Why is that cool? Bacteria eat Nu5GC.
Okay.
And when I study
I had never
all,
heard of this, so thank you so much. This changes a lot of stuff for me. I mean, I kind of don't like you because you're going to take away my pulled pork, but yay, that's the purpose.
well, and I've got a good friend, and I'm not financially involved with him, so I'll give him a shout out. There's a James Beard Award-winning chef. He has 3 James Beard Awards, only chef that I know. He has a ranch and he has grass-fed, grass-finished beef, but he's a protein biochemist. And he wanted me to endorse, his products. And I said, Jimmy, I can't because of this Nu5GC. And he says, well, what are you talking about? And I said, I give him this pitch. And he
Right.
says, oh, and fermentation breaks it down, right? And I said, yeah, fermentation breaks it down. He said, oh, shoot, this is easy. I'll work on this. So this guy now, he's got USDA approval. He has fermented brisket, fermented
Oh,
hamburger, fermented hot
We need
dog.
that website.
I need his phone number. Forget the website.
You're gonna love this stuff. It's called jrranchfoods.com.
JRRanchfoods.com.
If you go to JR Ranch, wrong place. jrranchfoods.com. And this
Nice.
stuff is delicious and it doesn't have any Nu5GC. So it's kind of like you can have your cake and eat it too.
Here you go. That's
Okay.
Wow.
awesome.
So, in
Thank
other
you
words,
so
just to
much.
understand, even if it's because we eat a lot of organ meat, and we especially get our meats imported from old school farmers, small farmers that have been growing and cropping this up for 100 years. Even if they're grass fed, fully mineralized, it's still not good for your gut bacteria. Is basically
Yeah,
what you're
because it has
saying.
the NG. What is it?
Yeah,
What is it? And what?
the one with the meat.
Nu5GC. You want to know what cut of meat has the highest Nu5GC by far? Quantum higher? Liver.
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 So Liver King is killing himself.
Oh,
Pretty much.
If you
Wow.
want to kill yourself, and kill your brain, and kill your joints. And here's the other really scary thing. Cancer cells use Nu5GC to produce local inflammation where they do extremely well because the oxygen tension goes down and they can survive and regular cells can't. Here's the deal. We do not make Nu5GC. We do not have the enzymes. So that means cancer cells have to acquire Nu5GC from the diet, which
wow.
explains why there's such a strong association between meat eating and cancer.
And colon cancer. I'm assuming.
Colon
Yeah,
cancer.
colon cancer.
That's
That
incredible.
makes complete sense.
Oh,
So
when
just to
you
make sure,
recommend-
wait, but just to make
Yeah,
sure, when
go
you
ahead.
mean poultry, you're talking about, because now you just flipped everything upside down, because I've heard chicken, it has the most amount of bacteria. But now you're saying poultry, chicken, turkey, goose, cow. I mean, all birds.
Pastured chicken.
Pasture chicken.
So
Okay.
ethically grown and maintained. You know, they're eating worms and stuff. They're not fed corn. All that stuff.
And again, you got to know your farmer. Almost all farmers also supplement pastured chicken's diet.
Yeah.
And I'll give one more shameless plug, and I have no financial interest.
Come on, give it.
Please bring them.
Give me the gem. Give me the gem.
Farmer Dan at enlightening.com. It's in Texas. Farmer Dan, I've had him on my podcast, but Lectin Light, L-I-G-H-T, chicken.com. He feeds lectin-free products to his pastured chickens and to his eggs.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
All right, so thank you. You just fixed our two sources where we're going to buy meat and chicken and eggs.
You're going to love this stuff. I mean, it's really great stuff.
Make sure you give them a shout out. We're going to give them a shout out because they're about to get a lot of business from us.
All right, Dan.
And thank you for bringing. I had no idea about this new GC. I mean, you blew my mind. Yeah. So thank you. That's awesome. So for you guys listening, this is groundbreaking stuff. Now you know the real story behind the carnivore diet.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So now let's move on to the next most important thing that people think is a villain. Cholesterol for heart health and longevity. Wow, a lot of contradiction here.
And with your background as a heart surgeon, we just had to ask you this because, and I think this will be very valuable because one of the things that we see a lot is people freak. I mean, they can have so many things wrong with their labs, and the one thing that they freak about is their cholesterol when they're reading total LDL and HDL. So, and by the way, just for the viewer, is this correct? At one point for 16 years, you were the surgeon that had the most amount of infant surgery, heart surgeries in the world?
Yeah, well, my partner and I, Leonard Bailey, pioneered infant and pediatric heart transplants.
That's amazing.
I've done more infant and pediatric heart transplants than anybody in the world.
So you're the guy. You're the guy we need to ask these questions. And we only got 3 of them for you, so don't worry about it. So what are the biggest myths about cholesterol and why does conventional medicine get it wrong?
One of the fathers of heart surgery, Michael DeBakey in Texas, always said that cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease. It's an innocent bystander. And I've written in my books, let's suppose I'm a alien circling the globe, reporting back to high command on another universe. I could say with pretty good assurity that I'm pretty sure that ambulances cause car wrecks because every time I see a car wreck, there's an ambulance. And once again, association does not mean causation.
Correlation or causation, sorry,
But cholesterol is essentially a spackling compound. And if you've got a crack or a divot caused by inflammation, then cholesterol is really good at patching it. And if you then damage that patch, cholesterol is good at putting another patch on it. What it is good at. But the point is, without inflammation to cause a damage to the surface of the blood vessel, cholesterol has no interest in that blood vessel. It doesn't cause the problem. The problem is inflammation. Okay. Now, where does inflammation come from? Well, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 2,500 years ago, said all disease begins in the gut. And the guy was right. So it's leaky gut and inflammation that causes it. Now, I'll give you a wonderful example from my experience. So, in the good old days of heart surgery, most of the coronary artery bypass we did were on smokers. And the smokers were skinny, which was wonderful for us. And they usually had really discrete blockages where blood vessels would flex. And beyond where those blockages were, their blood vessels were gorgeous. They were pristine. And it was a field day for us. We could just jump over there, have a nice blood vessel to sew to. Great. Fast forward, those people don't exist much anymore. Now we have metabolic syndrome patients, pre-diabetics, diabetics. And rather than having these discrete spots, now their entire blood vessel is just covered with patches of crud. And it's very hard to find a spot on some of these people to even put a bypass. Okay, so what? Well, when we started doing baby heart transplants, we have to put them on anti-rejection drugs because if you think about it, that blood vessel is from the donor, that's foreign, and the baby's blood is constantly seeing that blood vessel, and it sees these foreign cells, and we have to tell the immune system of the baby, don't attack those cells.
Right.
Well, as time progressed, we began seeing, quote, coronary artery disease in these kids. And that coronary artery disease didn't look like the smoker's coronary artery disease. It didn't have a single spot. It looked like our diabetic patients. It was diffuse. And you go, son of a gun. The same process that, the blood is attacking that lining of the blood vessel in the transplant kids, we're seeing in these adults. And you put two and two together and you go, that's because it's inflammation on the wall of the blood vessel. It's an autoimmune attack.
Right.
And cholesterol is just patching up this inflammation.
Not to mention, it's also causing vasal constriction because the blood vessels can't dilate. So now you don't even have good circulation.
Right. Exactly. Wow. So the point of all this is, how did these guidelines get started? I'm old enough to remember when these guidelines came out, and I was president of the American Heart Association Southern California chapter for 2 years, and the guidelines were made by 8 physicians, 7 of whom were consultants to the statin industry.
Wow.
7 of the 8 of them.
God.
That makes a lot more sense now.
Believe it or not, the American Heart Association, when statins came out, were given a generous grant to teach physicians about how important statins were by one of the statin companies. So it's like, oh, thank you so much. Yes, we'd love a couple $1 million to educate physicians about your drug.
Right.
We took the money.
Right.
Listen, Doc, I'm glad it came out of your mouth and I didn't have to ask you this because, first of all, thank you so much for your honesty and transparency because I know, look, we have 4 medical doctors that work with us and we're never we don't ever want to be in a position where we bash conventional medicine. I mean, like doctors.
It has its place.
Yeah, doctors save lives. And, I believe that 98 or 99% of doctors that get into this, they get into it for the right reasons because they have the healing spirit, right? And I believe that. I just, it is incredible to hear it from a guy like you who's been conventional. I mean, in the highest sense. I mean, you were president of the American Heart Association in California. You were a heart surgeon, a very accomplished heart surgeon, and continue after all your success and all everything that you've done in a career to continue to be in the trenches. You're not in some ivory tower writing, from a 30,000 foot view. You're in the trenches every week with patients. So you're also correlating what you're seeing. And one of my questions was going to be, with the widespread fear around cholesterol and with the reference ranges continuously lowering, making now healthy people eligible for stents. And, as a heart surgeon and nutritional expert, how do you, the question was going to be, how much of it do you think is driven by solid science or pharmaceutical interest? And you just kind of hit it on the head. And now, having said that, we know that stents have their time and their place, right? Like if there's a fire, you want to call the fire rescue, right? But does the evidence truly support their role in improving longevity? And in your view, what is the essence of cardiovascular disease, and how should people read their cholesterol levels?
Well, so the problem is that, for instance, there's good studies putting 75-year-old people on a statin to prevent heart disease.
All right.
And you can follow them for 5 years, and we'll take 5,000 people, put them on a statin drug, and look at it's a intent to treat. What are we intending to treat? Well, we want to prevent a death, a stroke, a heart attack, or a stent or a bypass. That's intent to treat. Why are you giving them this drug?
Yeah.
You follow 5,000 people for 5 years on a statin therapy. One person out of those 5,000 people will get a benefit.
Wow.
4,999 people will get no benefit.
I've read this. I've read this by Casey. She mentions this. Yeah.
20% of those people will develop insulin resistance from the statin drug. So not only didn't you do them any good, you did them harm. And again, Hippocrates says, do no harm. So I'll give you a great example. I have a fairly recent patient who's an administrator of a big medical group in my town. And he has a total cholesterol of 500. He has an LDL of 400. And he's 68 years old. And all of his physicians, are constantly badgering him that he's got to get on a statin drug. You're a walking time bomb. You're going to die today.
You're a walking heart attack.
Yeah, we need you. So he finally said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get a CT coronary angiogram, a Clearly scan.
Right.
And, if we see something, okay. So he, in the meantime, makes an appointment to see me, and we have some really sophisticated blood tests that look at inflammation on blood vessels and also in the gut. And I'll tell you that part of the punchline. He had absolutely no inflammation in his blood vessels, none. His cholesterol had absolutely no oxidation. It had no interest in his blood vessels. Now, I knew this, but he didn't know that. So he goes and gets his CT coronary angiogram, and it's crystal clear. There is not even a little dimple on any of his blood vessels. No plaque, zero. No coronary calcification, and that has nothing to do with anything, but it's crystal clear. So he goes back to his cardiologist and says, yeah. What do you think the response of the cardiologist was to this incredible information?
I still think you should get it just out of safety.
Yeah.
To be safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to be safe.
Yeah. Now we got to get you on a statin. It's like,
what?
you can't see unless your eyes are open.
Yes.
And, luckily when my life changed when I met Big Ed, who cleaned out his coronary arteries with a diet and taking supplements. And unless my eyes were open, I would have went, that's a fluke.
Pseudoscience.
Yeah. But you can't see unless your eyes are open. And
Right.
guys didn't have their eyes open. So when I met him, I said, I could have saved you the trouble because all my blood work says there's no way you're attacking your blood vessels.
Yes.
And so I actually managed several people with total cholesterols in the 500s. In fact, saw one of them yesterday. And they have no evidence of inflammation in their blood vessels. And they, exercise, fantastically. And I have no and they all have absolutely clear blood vessels. Now, I have other people who are on statins and PCSK9 inhibitors, and they have an LDL of 44, and their blood vessels are inflamed and they keep clogging up their stents, and they hear from their physician, we got to push you lower. Oh, you got to, and these guys have leaky gut. And we got to fix where the inflammation is coming from. Hippocrates was right.
And it comes through the mouth.
It comes through the mouth too. Yeah.
The fish
So-
die by the mouth.
Let me recap basically that. Number one, of course, our doctors have been indoctrinated, literally. The insulin resistance is caused because cholesterol is needed for hormones and neurosteroids. So it's hurting your testosterone, your estrogen production, which all contribute to helping you have more insulin sensitivity, and your neurosteroids for cognition, memory, and learning, etc. Aside from that, you're collapsing your blood vessels, and using statins, if from the research we've seen, only treats the large particles of LDL, not the small ones, which are the ones that are really harmful.
In fact, that's something I noticed very early on in my career when we started looking at particle size. Everyone who was put on a statin, yes, their LDL went down, but their small, dense LDLs went up. And that's not taught to any.
Yeah.
Also,
And what
I
I
heard
do
Mark,
also-
I heard Mark Hyman, like 50% of people that die of heart attacks have normal cholesterol and normal LDL.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, and the longest living humans typically have higher cholesterol levels, right? But what interests me the most is that all the research, and they have, meta-analysis, all these studies behind drugs that they can actually make and make through the pharmaceutical industry, not on things on your blood work that they don't really have drugs to provide. So
Or food, like you just said, someone that cleared out their arteries through food and
Right.
supplements. They don't
Right.
teach you this stuff.
So in regards to that, what are other markers should people be focusing on instead of just your traditional cholesterol and LDL from your expertise?
Well, there are, first of all, if you can get oxidized LDL, which is pretty cheap, that's a good way to start. There's a better test called oxidized phospholipid ApoB. It's shortened to OX, OX, PL-ApoB.
Okay.
It literally tells you whether cholesterol is interested in sticking to your blood vessels. There's also, yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh.
Also, people absolutely need to have their LP little a measured.
We know that.
Yeah, and you can fix it really easily with niacin, vitamin B3. Yes, you should have HSCRP, highly sensitive CRP. I go much deeper than that. But the other thing, please, please, please get your vitamin D check. Get your vitamin D above 100 nanograms per milliliter.
That.
Please, vitamin D is essential.
Why over 100? I would love eventually, I don't want to stop you, but just eventually touch on why over 100, because most people are like, oh no, it's too high. It's going to cause too much calcium buildup.
It's funny. I was educated by a couple of late 70-year-old patients a number of years ago when I first met them. Both of them had vitamin D levels of about 270. Seriously.
Wow.
And I'm looking at them, and they're sitting across from me, and I said, "You guys take a lot of vitamin D, don't you?" And they said, "Oh yeah, it's a longevity hormone." And I'm looking at them like, right. And I said, "Do you?" I don't know. Look, I'm looking at their kidney data, and because in theory it could kill your kidneys, and they're perfectly fine. And in theory, it could give you kidney stones. And I said, "Hey, kidney stones? No, why?" I said, "In theory, you could have numb fingers and numb toes." And I said, "Any numb fingers? No, why?" And I said, "Well, everything I've been taught, you ought to be dead." And and, and they and their calciums were normal, by the way. And they said, "You don't know much about vitamin D, do you, Sonny?" And I'm going, "Well, just what I've been taught." And they said, "No, maybe you ought to read about it." And sure enough, I started reading about it, and I started following Michael Hollick from Boston University and the University of California, San Diego. And lo and behold, it is one of the most important hormones in the entire world. In fact, what I learned in my autoimmune practice is vitamin D is essential to activate stem cells in the wall of the gut to repair the gut. And if you don't have an adequate level of vitamin D, they just kind of sit there and twiddle their thumbs, and vitamin D pushes them to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So I like to always tell people, I'm like, I don't know why the hell we call it vitamin D. Well, we call it because when it hits the skin, is a vitamin, but this is a gland that converts it into a calcifidiol, which the conversion becomes an actual active hormone with over 2,000 physiological and biochemical effects in the body. So yeah, your friend is absolutely right. It's a longevity hormone. And thank you for saying that, because I like to recap that. When people test their cholesterol, LDL, and HDL and triglycerides, we like to say, hey, you're just scratching the surface. There's 2 or 3 layers below that, which is the oxidized LDL, the apolipoprotein A, apolipoprotein B, and NMR. There's so much more to getting a comprehensive view on cholesterol rather than the simple triglyceride, LDL, and HDL.
To make decisions, right? And you also said the CT angiogram, which is kind of like the gold standard to really verify what your blood vessels.
We broke up.
Oh, he froze.
Yeah.
You there?
You there,
Steven?
Uh-oh.
No, don't lose now. You good?
I'm still here.
Okay.
Did you hear what we said, or did we get cut out?
No, I broke up a little bit.
So basically what I was saying that, when people measure cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides, that's just the surface layer, right? But then you got like 2 or 3 layers, which is the apolipoprotein A, B, oxidized LDL, the fractional size, etc. So if you want a comprehensive picture, you need to get all these other components to really understand what's going on, right?
And before you allow your doctor to put you on stand-ups, get a CT angiogram.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. Doc, because we're limited on time, now let's
we got like 4 really questions for practicality purposes.
Yeah, let's get into the solutions, how to restore our health, brain, microbiome, and just to improve our performance, right? So if you had to pick 3, what's the most powerful change someone can make today for a healthier gut, heart, and brain?
First, take 10,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day and add some vitamin K2. You only need about 100 micrograms.
Right.
That's first. Oh. Number 2, stop swallowing razor blades. And those are these plant compounds that don't like us very much, at least temporarily. If you're going to swallow razor blades, make sure you pressure cook them or ferment them like traditional societies do. Number 3, you got to feed good gut bacteria what they want, and that is soluble fiber. But as the Sonnenberg team from Stanford showed, you have to add fermented foods or fermented products to actually activate them doing what they need to do. And I wrote an entire book about that gut check, and it's also in the current book, The Gut-Brain Paradox. It's easy to add fermented foods into your diet. Vinegar is one of the greatest fermented foods there is. And I am actually the inventor of the healthy cola. That is San Pellegrino or sparkling water with balsamic vinegar mixed in it.
Okay.
And all those YouTube imitators or TikTok, I invented that so many years ago. Get over it, guys.
You are the OG. You're the OG.
Yeah, it's funny at the Biohacking World Premiere in Vegas in December. They invited me up.
Yeah, we were there. We're stars in the biohacking conference. Yeah.
They called me up and said, "Here he is, the OG," and I'm looking around, going, "What? The old guy?" And they said, "No, the original."
You ain't old, baby.
Yeah, the original gangsta. And I went,
yeah, that's true. Gotta give it to you.
It's amazing, man.
So if I understood you correctly, if you're gonna eat lectin, razor sharp foods, at least cook them to break down those lectins so they don't hurt, and the permeability of your gut, right? Beautiful. So you basically answered most of the other questions. The last one I would give you before we close out, are there any key lab tests or biomarkers people should track regularly to assess or improve their gut health and cardiovascular health?
Well, luckily we can measure leaky gut. We can quantify it. I founded Gundry Health, which is my telemedicine company, to allow people to get a blood test or even a finger prick to look at leaky gut and food sensitivities.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's cheap, it's accessible, and we do it every 3 months so that people know how they're doing. Also, the gut microbiome testing and gut health has advanced rapidly. I used to think it was a waste of time because it was a snapshot. But now that we know who's in there and we know we can measure the amount of short chain fatty acid production in anybody's gut, and those are now available. We're introducing them through gundryhealth.com as well, but there's other places that do it. Those are, if we did that instead of all these cholesterol tests, we wouldn't have to worry about anything. This is personalized medicine. In fact, we now know we can individually pinpoint what bacteria are missing and how to supplement them, but you got to give those bacteria what they need to eat. If you think of bacteria as grass seed, my office here in Palm Springs, if I gave somebody grass seed and they came back 3 months later and said, "You sold me bad grass seed," it didn't grow. And I said, "Well, what'd you do with it?" And they said, "Well, I took it out to the desert and I put it around and it didn't grow." I said, "Well, did you water it?" "No, you didn't tell me to." "Well, did you feed it? Did you fertilize it?" "No, you didn't tell me to." "Well, what did you expect?" So we can identify these bacteria that are missing and even give them to you, but you gotta fertilize them. You gotta give them what they want to eat. And that's where these fermented foods come in. That's where these fibers come in. So, and we know now what these guys want and how to give it to them. So it's exciting time.
I would add one thing to your recipe, which is you also have to be very patient and consistent, because the gut takes time, and most people want an overnight delivery, quick fix now, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, 30 years ago when I started this, I thought I could see a leaky gut in 2 weeks. Boy, was I naive. It literally takes 9 months to a year.
I'll ask you publicly, do you have any training programs? I would love to go us through it, because listen, you're in the trenches like we are every day. We're seeing so many weird effects. What breaks our hearts is younger and younger generations are coming with the level of resiliency of a 90-year-old who has, is diseased. And so, and as we know, and we learn from you, like the gut is such an important place to just start, because if you don't heal the gut, no matter what we do, you're still going to be lacking, right? You're still not going to be your full, you're still not going to be able to reach your maximum potential. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we deal with as human beings is, we all have this desire to reach our potential. Right. And that's why we're here. I believe our company, our sort of like mission and ethos, and I believe it's yours too. That's why you are who you are, and you're still seeing patients. I mean, you wouldn't be seeing patients if you really don't love this and care about people, because I know that about doctors. It's like you couldn't see yourself doing anything else, right? And even though it's difficult and challenging and it can be emotionally heavy, you still love it. And that's what makes you, we call it a warrior of the light. So if you have any training for us, so we can kind of
and for our public, we'll be happy to share it.
Extend your legacy and heal people, I would be thrilled to participate in it, Doc.
Well, we do have folks come and shadow us for a while, so we're welcome.
All right.
We're probably gonna go see you and open the hood to my gut and see what's going on, because I've already tested. In fact, I'm going now into this test, the mosaic, and I'm actually looking into mycotoxins just to go a little deeper with my gut, which that's a whole different conversation, right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, and we can go down that road. Believe it or not, bacteria hate fungi, and the feeling is mutual. But if you look at super old people who are thriving, they have a set of bacteria that are more than happy to eat mycotoxins, and they're
Look at that,
they're totally protected. In
man.
fact, they have a set of bacteria that eat xenobiotics. They eat plastics. They eat all these endocrine disruptors, and you go, son of a gun, no wonder these guys are so right. They've got their offensive front four. They've got them.
Oh my gosh. I think we're going to become your students, Doc.
Yeah, I think we're gonna not only students, we're gonna become your patient. I'm gonna go see you. And that's a big cup you got there, man. It's almost the size of your head. Look at that thing.
Well, look at there are.
I do the same.
Tea bags in here.
Yeah.
We've got a YouTube video of staff putting all these crazy teas in here for me.
And of course,
Dr. Gundry,
on your final book, you give obviously dietary recommendations.
Yes.
For people. So obviously that's, if you guys want more about Dr. Gundry's nutritional program and how to heal your gut and optimize your brain, obviously go and buy his book, and he has all the nutritional advice there. So
yes. And Dr. Gundry, again, thank you so much for your time today. Before we close out, is there anything we may have missed out that you may want to share with the public? Some updates? What's going on beyond biohacking for you, and where are you at?
Final message.
Oh, final message. It is never too late to change.
That's awesome.
And it is never too late. Even if you've been told you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, I actually start the book with a wonderful lady who was 62, a physician who had severe Parkinson's. And now, a year and a half later, I just saw her a couple of weeks ago, walks into the office, is back running, smile on her face, no tremor. And it's all because of the program that she followed that I put her on. So it's never too late. Never too late.
Right. Well, guys, there you go. Everything about gut and beyond. I mean, we got more than what we expected out of this. We can't thank you enough for your contributions and your groundbreaking research. And for those of you at home watching, we want you to stay healthy.
God bless.
Take care.